Hello, World Wide Web. Welcome back to the Hanging with Web Show. I'm GW Pomichter. Thank you so much for logging on or tuning in. Do me a favor, hit subscribe. We've got authors, artists, filmmakers, musicians, comic creators, creative minds of all kinds right here on HWWS WebTV. Right now, we are hanging out with author Jacquelyn Lynn, the author of Choices. Jackie, how are you?
Good to be here.
Thank you for hanging out with us today.
It's just having so much fun.
It's a great day.
Yes.
It's great. As writers, we get to spend a lot of our time behind our keyboard, and then we wait for customers out there in the Ethernet, the internet world, right? But here, you get to interact with your customer,
meeting them face to face.
That's awesome.
It is. It's wonderful.
So, Jacquelyn, tell us a little bit about Choices.
Choices is, I have been a nonfiction author for over 30 years. Choices is my first novel, and it is the first of a series in the Joyful Cup story series. It's a story of a hit-and-run crash. A college student takes her eyes off the road to send a text and hits a bicycle.
Sadly,
it is
pulled from the headlines, as it were.
Yes. And then the story follows the driver and the victim as they work through their resolution. She left the scene. He was seriously injured, medevac to the hospital. He has a wife, but they both hang out at the same coffee shop, the Joyful Cup, which is this is the Joyful Cup series. When I got the idea for the first book, and I realized I wanted to put them in this coffee shop where they could interact with the coffee shop owner, who is very, very wise. I realized, oh my gosh, I've got all kinds of stories here.
And what's great is you have these character archetypes to work with, whether it's the shop owner, who's sort of the wise man on the mountain, or the woman. It's an archetype. Work with me here, people. YouTube, you know. Okay, it's great. But you have that. Okay. By the way, that's an older archetype. For those of you that don't know it, the old sage on the mountain is far older than the old man on the mountain. That has been happening as long as people have been making up stories. You've been a nonfiction writer for a while. What made you decide to want to tell a different kind of story?
I'm not sure what was the driving force. It just, 5 or 6 years ago, it just started nagging at me that, I had written for and about businesses for so many years. I'd ghost written for very successful business people. And this story started germinating. And actually, how I finally got it done, for 5 years, I've been, I think I want to write a novel. I want to write a novel. I've got 40 books I've written, but I want to write a novel. And finally, I was having a conversation with the president of a local chamber of commerce, and he was giving me some advice on how to market one of my nonfiction books. I said, the thing is, great ideas, but I really want to write a novel. And if I take the time to launch this marketing campaign, I'm not going to be able to write a novel. And he says, tell me about your novel. So I gave him the synopsis. He picked up his phone. Now, this was in January of 2018. Picked up his phone. He says, okay, I just booked you to be the speaker at the Chamber Luncheon meeting in February 2019. I want you to speak on forgiveness, and I want this book on the table so people can buy it when the luncheon's over. And I'm like, okay, now I have a deadline.
Writers,
we don't work without deadlines.
That's right. We hate deadlines. We complain about them. We yell at editors about them, but we need them. Because that's what keeps you focused. Because your imagination is a wild place. You get in there and you can spend days and come out with 10,000 words. Or you can come out with 100,000 words. It really all depends on how close to that deadline you are.
Exactly.
So, so you dove into this, you wrote this, and it's out now in 2019.
It is out now in 2019.
And it's part of a series now. It's
It
gonna
is.
be
The next book will be out in probably second quarter of 2020.
awesome.
And
Which, by the way, guys, that is if you're a new creative artist, a new creative writer in particular, that is a nice goal to set, to get one out there every year.
right.
There's a tendency in the modern electronic world for writers to just want to crank out copy, and it can be, on a short term, that can be incredibly profitable, but it makes it hard for your copy to last because you're cranking out very formulaic copy. You don't have the time to put the thought and the energy into a story. These characters that you write about here in Choices, now the name of the series is going to be
The Joyful Cup
the
story.
Joyful Cup,
series.
which is the coffee house,
Yeah,
right?
the Joyful Cup story.
Choices, from the sound of it, and we don't have a copy here, guys, so I'm guessing. And then we talked. See, if you were listening, you know what we're talking about. If you weren't, rewind. It's the internet. You can do that. But very aptly named, Choices.
Because
the
it's
split
about the
moments.
choices we make, and yes.
The directions that our
And
lives
lives.
go in those split-second choices.
Right. And to elaborate on your comment about it's easy for some writers to say, well, I'm just going to, we've got the internet, I can get it up on Amazon like that, so I'm just going to crank things out. But I spent a lot of time doing research. The local chief of police spent over an hour with me telling me this is what happens when there's a hit and run. And for example, I had in my head where I wanted this crash to take place. And he said, no, you can't do it there because we've got surveillance cameras and we will catch her
Like
in a
that.
day.
Yeah.
He says, and on the same street, he says, if you go down here on this street, there's nothing there. There's no cameras, there's no
And
buildings.
it's those details. It really is. A good writer is a student of
Yes.
everything, a student of life.
Yes.
And that research is so critical to getting,
Getting it right.
If you're going to write anything in historically, know what streets were there and which ones weren't, which ones just came in the last 10 or 12 years. It's so important to get those details. Not every reader will notice.
But
Only
when
takes
they
one.
do,
That's right.
yeah. Number one, they leave you a bad review because it's that one
And
thing.
boy, do they.
Yes.
The internet, anonymity has made you very bold.
Yes.
You're the guy, we know. And so you really do. You have to speak
But
to that one
it
person.
also, when you make a mistake, it pulls the reader out of the story, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. That suspension of disbelief is a very important part of what we do. Because whether it's a realistic story or a motivational story, the bottom line is we're asking someone to believe something that we know didn't happen.
Right.
It happened in our imagination.
Yes.
And if we're going to ask someone to do that, they have to volunteer to do that.
I just got this review last week, and it just, had me so excited because the reviewer said, I couldn't believe this was fiction.
Wow. Done.
Yes.
But you want to make a writer's day, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
Number one, we live on stars.
Yes.
It's what we eat in lieu of money because y'all don't buy a lot of books for, So, but to leave us stars and reviews, and those are great, but that's a great review to read.
Yes.
To know that somebody suspended their disbelief enough so that when they got finished, they thought, wow, that
must have
it was
really
viscerally
happened.
real. That's amazing.
Yes.
She held up a card over there and said, what are readers saying? But that answers the question right there. That's what readers are saying. What's next in the coffee shop? We have choices.
Yeah.
Now, what's coming up?
The next story is Judgment, and as with choices, the message is about the choices we make. Judgment is that underlying message is that it is not our place to make judgments. And we're going to have a character who is stealing from his boss, who also happens to be a longtime friend. He's doing it for what he thinks is a good reason. It's not, because it's not, but...
Writers for a decade now, maybe a little bit more than a decade, have been toying with the notion of our bad guys. When you and I were coming up reading different pieces of literature, watching television or movies, bad guys tended to be two-dimensional. It was, this is the bad guy always wears black and he's evil and that's it. In the last 15 or 10 or 15 years, we've explored the idea that a bad guy is usually not a bad guy in his own mind. There's usually a motive there, a reason there. And whether or not we agree with it, it's usually very compelling as a story point. It makes our bad guys far more interesting.
And good people will do bad things.
Oftentimes with the best intentions.
Yes.
And that's important. And I love that you hit it right up front from the point of view of judgment, because that's what we've been doing. We've been doing it for generations. That's why our bad guys were so two-dimensional. That's why we're doing our best to give them depth, because people have always been quick to judge on a moment.
Right.
I know I did an exercise with my kids when they were in their teens. Because all kids are I'm going to be myself, and I don't want to be judged. And I used to say, okay, well, we're going to get in the car and we're going to drive to what you think is the worst part of town. And I'm going to let you drive. I'm going to unlock the doors, and I want you to drive really slow with the doors unlocked, and I want you to just drive down that street. If you make it all the way from this end of the street to that end of the street without locking the door, then you can come home and tell Dad about judgment. If you don't, then you have to admit that you too are guilty of judging based on the status of the paint, the neighborhood, the reputation.
Very superficial things.
Superficial things, because you don't know the people who live in this neighborhood or what they're going through on a daily basis. All you know is your perception. And so judgment is one of those very important things that we all have a tendency to do. And before we can stop doing it, the first step, like any other problem, is admitting that we do it. And saying, how do I do better?
Yes, and making those judgments in this story, he's thinking that he's a better person than she is because he gives more, and he gives away all the money he steals. It's a real Robin Hood kind of a
Robin
thing.
Hood thing happening there. Well, Robin Hood is the perfect story to compare that to, because I think that's what that piece of literature was really all about, was the notion of, is it okay to steal from the rich to give to the poor? Is it okay to be an outlaw if the laws are unjust? It explored these concepts in a time when the answer was always no. There was a two-dimensional answer to that question. And this character now raised the issue with would you do this? If the law is unjust, will you break it? If this is what's happening, will you fix it, right the wrongs? And now to go full circle and say, okay, it's okay to be rebellious, and it's okay to say, yes, I would be Robin Hood. But if you're going to be Robin Hood, do you know that you're on the just team? Do you know that you're on the right team?
Exactly.
Do you know? And judgment is a great way to look at that.
And how would you feel if it was your money that somebody was taking away because they didn't think you were doing the right thing with it?
Well, and that's just it. That's part of that judgment, I think, is we often see judgment as sort of the big guy looking down at the little guy. We see Prince John looking at Robin Hood saying he's judging Robin. But we have to ask ourselves the question, did Robin prejudge Prince John? Was there a prejudgment there as well? And wouldn't we all be a little better off if neither one of them would judge the other?
Exactly.
And simply try to, as they say, walk a mile in those shoes and see if we can come to some kind of a balance, because it really is, at the end of the day, about how we treat each other. And I'm sure that your characters are going to find that out in the coffee shop. They're going to spend their time there. What do you have a projected date for?
I'm targeting second quarter, but I'm giving myself a little wiggle room because nobody's given me a deadline yet.
That's your, no, don't,
Yeah.
Tell you what, first click on the link and buy choices, read it. When you want more, send Jacquelyn some deadlines and say, we need it now. That's what we need, okay? That's our shut up card. Apparently you and I have talked way too much and had way too much fun. So we're gonna say thank you to our partners and our friends over at Brevard Film and Talent, our great friends at Hearts Helping Others of Central Florida. That's families helping other Central Florida families. Bea and her crew are doing a great job over there. Space Coast Comics and Indie Originals, Jake Estrada, David Grace, and Chuck Fresh. Guys, check out the Space Coast Comics first feature-length film, Bocas, on Amazon Prime right now. our good friend Josh Bauer at J Bauer Art for all the art that's on our set. Thank you so much, Josh, for all you do for us. Thank you to Famous Faces and Funnies, Rick Shea and the fantastic team at Famous Faces and Funnies. And today we made a new friend. Thank you to Echo Arts and Gifts for this awesome anime fan that's on our set this weekend. We've been hanging out with author Jacquelyn Lynn, so be sure to come back to see who we're hanging with next. Jacquelyn, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. That was a lot of fun.
It really